you're still waiting for a conversation that is never going to happen. Maybe it ended with silence, a message that never came, a door that closed without an explanation, a relationship that just stopped without anyone saying why. And you've been replaying it ever since, trying to find the moment you missed, the thing you could have said differently, the version of events that finally makes sense. Because if you could just understand it, you could just move on. That's what you've been telling yourself. But what if the understanding isn't coming? What if the conversation never happens? What if they never explain? What if the door stays closed and no one ever tells you why? Then what? Because nobody tells you what to do with that. And I want to talk about that because I've been there and I know exactly how that waiting feels. But before I get into what healing without closure actually looks like, I need to say something about closure itself because I think we've misunderstood we've misunderstood what it is. I remember sitting with my phone in my hand, drafting a message I never sent. I'd written it maybe 20 times, different versions, different tones, some angry, some calm. One that was 3 paragraphs long and said everything I needed to say to someone who had already decided they didn't need to hear it. I wanted them to understand what they'd done. I wanted them to feel the weight of it. I wanted them to say, yes, I see it. I'm sorry. I understand. I thought that was closure. It wasn't. Closure isn't a conversation. It's not an apology. It's not the explanation you never got. Closure is the moment you stop needing those things in order to be okay. And here's the part that took me the longest to accept because this is the thing nobody says clearly enough. The closure you're looking for, they cannot give it to you, even if they wanted to, even if they tried. And once you understand why, everything about the way you've been waiting starts to make a different kind of sense. You want them to explain it so the story makes sense. But the explanation would be their version filtered through their perspective, shaped by what they're willing to admit, limited by how clearly they even understand themselves. And even if they told you everything, even if they sat down and gave you every reason, some part of you would still have more questions. And the questions aren't really about them, the questions are about you. Am I enough? Was I too much? Is there something about me that made this inevitable? And those questions, they can't answer. They cannot answer, not honestly, not in a way that will actually land, not in a way that heals the part of you asking. So if closure can't come from them, where does it come from? Because I'm not going to tell you to just accept it and move on. That's not an answer. This is because real closure, the kind that actually sets you free, it's built, not received, and it looks nothing like what you've been waiting for. Real closure is the moment you write your own ending, not because you have all the answers, but because you decide, I'm not going to keep my life on hold, waiting for someone else to give me permission to continue. It's the moment you stop treating the unanswered question as a wound that needs their hands to heal it. and start treating it as something you are capable of carrying and eventually setting down on your own terms. That doesn't mean pretending it didn't hurt. It doesn't mean forgiving before you're ready. It doesn't mean you were okay with how it ended. It means I chose not to outsource my healing to someone who already left. And here's what I want you to really hear, because this is the part that I think is going to shift something. The answered question doesn't have to be answered for you to heal. It has to be grieved, because there's a difference between understanding something and grieving it. And I think you've been trying to do the first one to avoid doing the second. You you have to grieve the explanation you deserved and didn't get. You have to grieve the conversation that would have made it make sense. You have to grieve the version of them who you thought would never just disappear without a word. And you have to grieve the version of you that believed if you loved someone well enough, they would at least give you the dignity of an ending. That version of you deserved deserved better. And the grief of that is allowed to be real, even without a funeral, even without anyone else acknowledging it, even without them ever knowing what it cost you. You grieve it, you name it, you give it the weight it deserves, and then slowly you begin to build your own ending. Not because you're over it, but because you're done waiting for for someone else to write it for you. And that's what I want to leave you with. Not a resolution, but a different way of holding this. Healing without closure is possible, not because the questions stop mattering, but because you stop needing their answers to give yourself permission to move. The ending you deserved, you can write it. Not the one they should have given you, but the one where you decide that your peace is not a contingent of their explanation. You don't need them to close the door, you can close it yourself. Closure was never theirs to give you, it was something you built on the day you decided that their silence was their answer. And your life was too short to keep waiting for a better one.